Hi and welcome to our second video from the series Blog with Nest.js and Angular. So in this video we are setting up a feature module for our user entity. We will have some basic CRUD endpoints and we will also use the TypeOrm repositories and do everything with observables instead of promises as it's usually done with Nest.js. The basic structure of the video is like in the first one. So first we have a look at the video outcome. Then we will write a user story for it and then we will implement it. So as promised, we will first have a look at what we built in this video. And here we have our user feature module and it has a controller, it has models, it has a service and it is working. So it's starting and we have some routes. And so we can see it here very easily what they are doing. We can create a new user. We can say Thomas free. The API responds with the new object. And if we do it again, it returns an error because it's already there. We can get all users that we have created. We can find one user, for example this one. We can delete one user, so the number 6 by ID. And we have affected rows 1, so it's deleted. So if we run this again, we will see this user is no longer here. And it's removed. And we can also update one user. For example, we can update user number 4 and we then have to provide a new name for it. We can call it Max Mustermann, which is a famous German name for this, and it's Max1, and you see before it was this, and if we now update it, we get affected rows 1. If we go again and get all, we see now it's changed. Hi everyone and welcome back to this video. Now we are in the second part of our blog tutorial and today we want to have adding a little feature module for the user entity. And for this we also start with writing a card or a user story that we could name as follows, like create a working user API, and we could say as a technical lead I want to have a basic CRUD behavior for the user entity. And we can say the acceptance criteria are as follows. We want to use TypeOrm and the repository from TypeOrm, so we don't have to code everything by ourselves. We want to use observables and not, or let's say instead of promises. So we will use RxJS to work around it. We also want to create our feature module user, and our user entity should have some properties. And this should be a very basic one, name and username. This should be unique. And also ID, which is also unique, and our primary key. So this is very basic. And the last thing that we want to is for now we are starting to use Git Flow. So we are not working on master anymore in our Git repository, but we use the Git Flow branching model, and so we will have like our own branch for every ticket that we do. And so we can say we want to use Git Flow, and for this we have to give it a name, and we can say V-02. Okay, so let's start with initiating the Git Flow, and for this we can just use the command git flow init, and this is already coming with your basic Git installation on Windows, and I will have to do -f because I already did it once, and this forces it to do it again, but you can just use git flow init. So now it's asking us which branch should be for production, and we will go just with the standards, so we will just enter everything. So we will use For feature branches, the name feature. For bug fixes, bug fix. For release, release. For hotfix, hotfix. And for support, support. And we don't want to have a version tag prefix. So now everything is initialized. And now we want to create our first story or our first feature. And we can, for this, use the Git Flow. Or we can say Git Flow feature start. And now we name it. And we have seen here, we named it V-02. And so we will also name it V-02. And now you see we have a new branch based on develop. And now we are on, you switch to this feature branch, V-02. And we can now start committing our things. And if we are done, we can finish this feature branch. And now we are on our feature branch and we can start by implementing our user feature module. So now first we can cd into our API. Then we can go into our source folder, like here. And we can use the nest CLI again to generate our module. We can just say generate module, and we want to have it named user. And this does two things for us. First, it generates our user module file here, and it also imports it here, and we use it as an import. Next, we can go into our user folder, and we also want to generate a service user, and we also want to generate our controller. But first we have to name this service. And we want to name this controller. And you see why I typed here user is because now it's named user service and it's user service. And we have here our user controller and user controller, so everything is fine. We also have generate our spec files to it. So now that we have the controller and the service, we also need our entity or our interface. And so we can create a new folder named model, or we can rename it to models. And there we want to have our interface user.interface.ts, and here we can just say export interface user. And now we can just think what should our user have, and we said it should have an ID. We can make it optional. It's of the type number. He also has a name, optional, which is a string, and we have a username, which is optional and also a string. So the second model that we need is our user entity, so which we will store in the database. And for this we can just say export class user entity, and we can annotate it with entity, yes, from TypeOrm. And this has the same properties as the user interface, so we do need an ID of a type number, and we can also annotate it with its primary generated column from TypeOrm. We have our name, which is a string, and it is a column. And at last we have a username, which is also a string, and this is a column, but it should also be unique, so every user should just have, or there should just be one username for every user. So you can also both name Thomas, but your username would be Thomas1 and Thomas2 or something like this, so it cannot be the same. And for this we can pass in here like an option, unique, and this is true, so it should be unique. So now we have our user interface and our user entity, and for this we can use our user module because we will import here our TypeOrm feature module. And for this we add our imports array. And here goes in the TypeOrm module from TypeOrm, and not for root but for feature, because we are now in the user and where we want to add our user entity. Now we do have our interface and our entity, so we can start with the userService. We can go into the file. We have our class userService here. And the first thing that we will need is a constructor. And where we need to inject our repository, and we can use the annotation at inject repository from NestJS TypeOrm. And we want to inject the user entity. And this is private read-only user repository. And it's of type repository from TypeOrm. And it's the type user entity. So now we can do some stuff with this. And we can say we want to create a user. We need an import user from type user. And we return an observable of the type user. And we can just say return. And normally we could say this.user repository .save. And we want to save our user into it. But since we are returning an observable and the user repository is returning a promise, we will have to do it quite differently. So we can use the from operator from RxJS. Then we need some other methods like find all we can use here. There we don't need anything as an input. We want to return an observable also. And this is now user an array. And here we also return this user repository dot find. And we also need here from, so we can convert the promise into an observable. And now I will do this with all these one. We can say we want to delete one. And to delete one we need our ID of the user, which is a number. We want to return an observable of type any, so later we can also refactor this and name an appropriate type. And we want to return from this user repository dot delete, and we want to delete by ID. Next we want to say we want to update one. And for this we need our ID, which is a number, and we need the user of type user that we want to change. And the observable should also return any. We can use again return from this.user repository dot update. And the first input is here the ID which we want to update, and the second one is what we want to change, so the user, so we are just switching it. So this was the service where we make the connection to our repository, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to add the actual endpoints. And here in our controller it's named user, but we want to have the plural form of it. And we need also here in constructor to inject our userService. And we import it here. And when we have like the same methods or the same names that we also have in our service, so we want to create one. We want to find one. We want to find all users. We want to delete one. And we also want to update one user. So now we have all our basic methods. Now we can start by implementing the first correctly. So we can say we have here, it's a post call for create, and we will extract from the body our user, which is from the type user. And we will return an observable, which is also from type user. And here we can just say return this .userService .create, and we have to give it the user. In defined one we have like a get request, and this should go for the ID. So you have to look here for the column, which column, I think it's named in English, so that it goes for the route. So this would be, I will plan it in for you. And here we want to have our param because we are in the URL. And we are also returning an observable from the type user. And we return also the user service and defined. Don't we have a find one method? We don't have it, so we have to add it. And we want to find him by ID number. And this is an observable. And we return user. And for this we can also use our repository. And this should have a method like find one. And we want to inject our ID. So now we can use this method in the controller. And we inject our ID into it that we get from the URL. So we can just go for params.id. So why isn't it working here? Variable user return this.userService.find1. Ah, so now it's working. Okay. So to find all, we have our, this is also a get, but without the ID. And we want just to return, if we call it, an observable of the type user array. We can also return this user service dot find all. If we want to delete one, we make a delete request. And here we are also using our ID params. And we can make it maybe a little bit better than define one. So we can say param ID. And we can just say ID type string because it's coming from our URL. And then we return this user service dot delete one, and we convert the ID to a number. And at last we have our update one, and there we will need two things, because we need a param from our URL and we also need a body. So this will be a put request also to our ID. And here we now need our param ID. And we need the body. from it where our user object will be. This is from the type user. And we will return our observable, and this should be of type any. And this here too, I think. And we can just use again our userService, and we can update 1. And now we have again to parse our ID to a number, and we also have to insert our user. So this should be it. So we have like a very basic behavior. So we can create one user, we can find one, we can find all users set in the database, we can delete one user by ID, and we also can update one user. So we can change the name or something like this. And we have reached this with our TypeOrm module and our user entity. Now we can test if it's working. Now that we have our code ready, we want to test if it's if it's working. So we can just start our app. We can say npm run start dev, and now it's starting up, and we can see if there's any failure or any mistake or error already. But we have everything is connected. We have mapped our user routes here. You can see it, and it started successfully. So now we can go into Postman to test our API, and we can create some requests here. So we can say we are going to localhost 3000 users, and we want to make a post request. So we want to create one. And for this, we need our body, and we want to have it raw and in JSON. And now we have to name it like we named the entity. So we have a name, and this could be Thomas Test. And we also have a username, you know, this unique thing that we named. And this could be Thomas1. Now if we make this post request against the API, it should return our user. So you see it would return Thomas Test, username Thomas1, and its ID 6. So if we do it again, we should get a mistake because the username is already taken. And you see it's an internal server error, but if we go with Thomas2, it should work, and we have the ID 8. Next thing that we want to do is we have our GET request. And this will just get all users, or should get all users. If we send it, you see we have here our array, and we have our 4. This was just an example by me. We have our Thomas Test, Thomas1, and we have our Thomas2. Then what we also implemented was the find one. So we have again our localhost 3000. And now we have said the next thing that is here is the ID. So for this we could use the ID 8, because you know here we have our ID 8. We want to get this user. And we send it, and we get exactly just this user object. The next thing is we can say we want to delete one user. This will be the exact same URL, but it's a delete request. And now we have one affected. And if we again refresh this request, this should be disappeared because it's deleted. You see? It's gone. And now we can update, for example, this user. We want to make a put request to update it. We use this, and we can say it's user 6. And now we have to provide in the body the new user or the changed user object. And so we have the name here and the username here. And you see, before with user 6 it was Thomas Test and Thomas1, and now we can just call it, for example, Lisa Mustard, and we call it Lisa 1. So we update user 6, and we should get affected 1. If we now refresh this should be changed. You see now it's Lisa Mustard and username is Lisa 1, but the ID stays the same. So now that we've created the request, we can make it a little bit prettier, and we can say we want to save it in a collection. And we create a new collection for this, and we can just name it block, so it's very basic. Or we can say block Postman requests, and we save it here and we name it create user. So it's here, save block Postman request, create user. We also have here our get all users. We can name it like this, get all users. We have our user find one user. We have our delete one user, and we have our update method, or our update request, update one user. So now we have saved them all to this folder, and now we can make it, or we can export it, and we will save it to our YouTube public into our block. And now we can insert the collection here, like you see, and so it's in our Git repository. And if you download the repository, you can just import them with Postman, and you can just run them, and so you have them there. So we exported it, and now you see here we have our Postman block requests. And I will create a new folder for this, not inside the API. And we name it Postman, and we can just put this into it. So now at last we can commit everything, and we give it a message like V-02, and what we did was create user feature module with userService and userController, added Postman requests and the user entity and the user interface. Now we can push it. So we have to set our upstream, so I didn't do it. No. You can do this. And now we have finished our story, but we can check again. So we can again go into our story, and we can say we use TypeOrm, and this is done. We used observable instead of promises, already done. We have our feature module user, it's also done. And we have our properties name, username, ID, and we used our Git Flow. So what we can do now, we can go into our code and we send Git Flow feature finish, because we are already in our feature branch. And what this will do now, it will merge, or better rebase our features or our commit. Now we have to look what it's asking us. So, but this seems everything fine, and now you see what it did. We said finish. We switched to our branch develop. We updated our branch with every changes we did. And we merged our feature video branch back in develop. It was deleted locally, and it was deleted remote on origin. And now we are back on develop, so we can say git status, and we are back on develop. Now we can go into our GitLab folder, and if we refresh the master, there should be nothing changed, but for the changes we have to go to our develop. So we didn't push the develop right now, so we have to push it again, or we have to push the upstream. And now if you refresh it, we have our master, which should not be affected. And we have here our develop branch, where our Postman is, where our API has the source, and should have our user feature module and our user entity, everything we did here. So what we can do now to make it a little bit clearer, we have our readme. So the first thing is you have to add your own database to run it. And the second thing would be switch to branch develop to get the latest changes. We can now add this again. Changed readme. And we also want to push it. And now what we can do here, we have our project overview, and we can have like a merge request. And we just push to develop, and we can create a merge request, and normally someone else would review it. But we say we want to merge from develop into master. We have our two commits here, one of finishing our feature branch and the second one changing the readme. And we submit the merge request, and now since I'm the only owner of the repository, I can just accept it, or I can merge it. Now it's checking if there are any merge conflicts, and normally there should not be one, and then it's merged. So now we also have our changes here all on the master branch. So before we end this video, let's have a look at what we will implement in the next video. And here we will make a login endpoint for authentication with email and password. And this will look if the hashed password in our database is the same that we provide here as password. And if it does so, we will generate a JWT with all user properties, which will make or authenticate us against our API. And we will also add a role property to the user. So every user will have a role, and we will protect some endpoints with JWT, some with JWT and with or will require a specific role. So some routes can just be called by an admin user, or just by a normal user. Yeah, so it will be more complicated in the next video. So thank you for watching, and see us in the next video.